Welcome to our program this week. We're so glad you joined us. We have our first special guest, Mr. Todd Womack. He's Social Studies Department Chair at Coffee High School, but he also has a very special, fun job. And they're all free, of course.
They're all free, yeah.
Tell us about the World War I Commission.
The United States World War I Centennial Commission was created by an act of Congress back in 2013 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the First World War. The United States was a little behind the other countries. Britain and France already had their commissions up and going. So did Canada and Australia. We got ours started, and they decided to create individual state commissions as well. So I'm an advisor to the national and mainly to the Georgia Commission. They sought me out a little over a year ago. Apparently I'm the only person who's actually researched Georgia during World War I. So they got in contact with me, and I met with them, and they've got, for Georgia, we're becoming the example of what other states should do. We're way more active than the other states. Some states don't even have their commissions established yet. And the mission of the commission is threefold. It is to educate, commemorate, and honor. The education part of it, we have a website which is World War I, Centennial.org. The site is growing every day. We have really good website designers and editors. And there's a lot of information nationwide. You can look it up by state. My information, the research of Georgia is on there. Some other states have posted some things. We're working on a photo history for just Georgia. There's also going to be a book for the nation, but they haven't even started working on that one yet. They're cataloging photos that people are sending in. They're reaching out to museums across the country that have World War I displays and archives. There are going to be teacher workshops. The first one, I think, is this fall. And this will be more planned from now until 2019 is when the commission ends. And that's the education part of it. The commemoration part of it is working with those museums, building up the exhibits. We're in Georgia, where I'll be working with the Atlanta History Center. They're going to have an artifact identification day. People bring in stuff, and there's going to be a World War I exhibit that they can look at. But we hope that they would bring in World War I photographs of their family members, stuff that no one's ever seen before, and we want to scan them in to create an archive. And a couple of members of the commission, the History Commission, are digitizing two books that are kind of rare. There's a Georgia State Memorial book, which has the photographs of every Georgia soldier who died during the war. And they've done just a couple years after the war, and they weren't that many printed. It's actually a sad book because you realize every photo of that guy died. We're posting those photos with this short bio, what unit they were in and how they died. And also the Georgia Division American Legion history book, which went into what Georgia units did a little bit in the war, and then the Legion, which was created right after World War I from men who had served in it. So those will be available online, hopefully by the next year, which for us would be the 100th anniversary of when the United States got involved in the war from 1917.
Okay. It sounds very interesting, but you wrote a book.
Yes.
On research, and we still have that. Can people get that book, or you just?
That information is probably going to be reprinted in the photo history.
Okay.
As from background information.
What about people locally that might have pictures of their family members from World War I in uniform or whatever?
We have a few people who've already contacted me, like Sparky Smith.
Right.
Had his grandfather's photo in uniform. I'd be happy to look at them. You can contact me via the Coffee High School website. We'd probably want to scan some of those in eventually. We're going to look at having 2 or 3 other events around the state where we set up scanners and provide copies for people. We're not keeping the photos. We just want really good, high-quality scans, and maybe can identify if they don't know what unit the guy was with. Or, we can look at the patches and the insignia and try to figure that out for them. But yeah, I'd be happy to see anything. I've only actually seen 3 photos of Douglas or Coffee County men that served.
I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that I remember seeing one in our Rogers collection of a guy in a World War I uniform. I think so. But one of the saddest things to me, well, there's 2 parts to this that bother me. Number one was the forgotten war. World War II came along and kind of overshadowed it. And so, and a lot of times, even back in the days when I taught history, you skimmed over World War I to get to World War II.
Right.
And the other one is there are so many pictures from that era, and nobody knows who they are. And to me, that's even a worse thing.
Well, it was the first war that mass-produced cameras were available to the masses. The Kodak Brownie had been around for about 15 years by then, and it was relatively inexpensive, and soldiers could carry them in their pack. They were fairly lightweight. When you went through the photos, which I think there was 20 photos in a roll, you had to send the entire camera back to the Kodak company in New York. Yeah, you couldn't take the film out, and they would take the film out, develop it, put new film in it, and send the camera and the developed photos back to you. They're a little smaller than later 1940s, 50s photos, and they have that sepia tone.
Oh, yes.
So you know that they're a Kodak Brownie photo. But it actually took if you stood still, it took really clear photos to be such a poor lens that it had. But they were cheap, and anybody could get them. Photos were still a novelty. You could go to arcades and still get tintypes, and tintypes go back to the Civil War.
Right.
Because it was just a unique way to get. So we do have a few World War I soldiers who stopped off at an arcade and got a photo made. It wasn't something people normally did, though. But they could take it to the front, and then they could take photos. A lot of camp photos, a lot of training photos. There are very, very few battlefield photos during combat. The cameras. Brownies that couldn't do it very well. There was a few, like they were holding it above the trench and took a photo, and it's out of focus and you really can't see anything. And when the professional photographers, and the Army did hire quite a few of them, putting themselves out with the focus time that was needed, they would get their head shot off. So there's a lot of photos in books that say combat photo, but probably only about 1% of them. It's that, or even in World War II, there are very few photographs of actual combat. Because the photographer would expose themselves. Yeah, they'll all say, "Oh, this is during combat," but you can look. It's like they're posing for the photo. They would not be doing that during combat. So we do have a lot of photos of men, and a lot of these men. This was the first time they'd ever left their home in their life, and they were proud of the uniform, and they had to send a photo back to the girlfriend, the wife, the mother. So yes, there are a lot of photos from World War I. But because no one wrote on the back of who they were or when it was, these went up in the trash, unfortunately. I don't know who this person is. They don't even know what war the uniform is from. Civil War photo people would hold on to.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, there are a lot of photos from World War I, but a lot of them have been lost or misplaced.
What about Homefront? Is the commission doing anything with what was happening here?
There is actually, coming up this fall, there's an exhibit about women during World War I at home and abroad. There's also working with, there's the woman who came up with the poppy emblem.
Oh, yeah.
She's from Georgia.
Yes.
And she taught at UGA.
Yeah.
And she is going to have an exhibit later on, I think in 2018. There are some, we're working on, because they're so expensive and the commission has a limited budget, we want to put up a marker to the first African-American combat pilot ever who was born in Columbus, Georgia.
Oh.
Jacques Ballard, who, as a kid, he was a teenager, early teens, saw his father roughed up by a Klan, and he thought if he stayed in Columbus, something like that would happen to him. So he ran away first to Atlanta, where he became a horse jockey, and he apparently was really good at it. He did it for several years, but then decided that he wanted to leave the South, stowed away on a train, wound up in Virginia, and then stowed away on a boat to Scotland, where he joins up with the vaudeville group that's traveling England. It was basically a minstrel show.
Right.
And he traveled through England for a while doing that, song and dance, juggling, that kind of stuff. And then he met an African American who was already over in Europe, a boxer, who thought he would make a good boxer, so he started training him. And he went to France, which he fell in love with the place because there was racism to some of the colonial people that the French had conquered, but it wasn't anything like the South of the United States. And he fell in love with the place and started boxing there and won quite a few matches. And then World War I broke out, and he decided to volunteer to fight for the French Foreign Legion. And he was a machine gunner, and he was wounded and won the Croix de Guerre, which is sort of like their Distinguished Service Cross, which is just below the Congressional Medal of Honor. And when he was recuperating in the hospital, he actually met a white Southern soldier who had already volunteered in the American Ambulance Corps that was over there. This is before the United States got involved. And they actually became friends, which is kind of ironic. That would not have happened in the South, but over there it was okay. And they were joking around one day, supposedly, and Bullard said that I'm going to become a pilot. And his friend bet him $1,000 that he would never become a pilot. And so that spurred him on. And he apparently paid the $1,000 bet, which was a lot of money then. He became the first, not the first black pilot, but after training and him going into combat, he became the first African-American combat pilot ever. He had several planes during the war, but his most famous one was a solid white plane, which the ground crew said, why do you want it? This is going to stand out. And he says, yes, I want the Germans to see me coming. And it had a long black swallow, which was a bird. It's very fast. It does a lot of, very agile. He was known for his acrobatic flying. And he was nicknamed the Black Swallow of Death. That was one of his nicknames. And he had a heart painted on one side after he got the bird off, and it was bleeding. And it, in French, which I took German in high school, but in French it said basically everyone bleeds red. Everyone bleeds the same. And he did go into combat. He is credited with partial kills. It's a big debate about how many planes he actually shot down. But like the other pilots at the same time, he was kind of eccentric, and a lot of them adopted weird pets. If you've seen that movie, it was out a few years ago, they had that pet lion, which was true. The movie's not true, but there was an American squadron that did have 2 pet lions that they took up with them, so they were too big. He had a pet monkey, and he taught the monkey to cling on his back and wrap his arms, it was a spider monkey, and wrap his arms around his neck. And he had supposedly had a goggles and a scarf and everything for the monkey. And unlike the movies where they seem to have unlimited ammo, you could pull the trigger for 15 seconds and you were completely out of ammo. And then you just had to go back to base. There was really nothing unless you had a spare drum. So occasionally they'd get in dogfights and they'd both run out of ammo, and they would just salute each other or wing wag and fly away. There's nothing they could do. So they would fly up next to each other to salute, and he supposedly taught his monkey to give him the one finger salute, which the Germans didn't know what that meant. But when the United States got involved in the war, all the American pilots volunteered to switch over from the French Air Force to the American. They accepted every single combat pilot except for Bullard because he was black. And they threw all these stumbling blocks up, and so he didn't actually fight for the United States. He had